Golden State Media Concepts Fantasy Football Podcast is your one-stop shop for fantasy football news and advice. Can't decide on who to draft on the first round? Going gaga on how to line up your team. Got you covered. Traditional leagues, dynasty leagues, PPR leagues, IDP leagues, even daily fantasy football leagues. Join us as we break down all the questions of fantasy football. It's the Golden State Media Concepts Fantasy Football Podcast.
Welcome to the GSMC Fantasy Football Podcast. This is your host, Tom Dougherty. And of course, this podcast is brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. It is a Tuesday here, and we are getting close to the NFL Draft. I know there's going to be some players that are going to be probably having some fantasy implications come this draft, but we're going to talk about the quarterbacks. I know to start off the show here and see, we're going to do some speculation to see if any of them are really going to be viable to be big players in the fantasy world come the season. I mean, it's going to be interesting to see how they each fit into their teams that they're going to be on. We obviously don't know which teams they're going to be on. We don't know what times they're going to be on as they are going to be picked on Thursday. And there's going to be more stories out now that the Browns might be going after Baker Mayfield at number 1. We don't know. You never know with the Browns, obviously, because they're the Browns. But I mean, that's the kind of team where you match up against, and you find who you're going to find your whether you're going to start a quarterback against the Browns or you're going to get healthy against the Browns. It's going to be interesting because that's who you see a lot of teams. A lot of people do that. I mean, that's what I did last year whenever I had a question mark regarding who to start or who not to start. Like, okay, who's playing the Browns? Okay, what's defense going to pick up? Who's playing the Browns? Because it was always a question of whether they would actually be able to defend that game or be viable on the defensive side. I mean, it looks like on the offensive side, I mean, if it'd be able to make it offense work at all. Because last season, I mean, it wasn't really pretty. I mean, it wasn't pretty at all. They had some running backs last year. We'll see if they actually even go running back. They have 2 picks coming this draft, the Browns do. I know we talk a lot about, it's weird how we talk about a lot about this team that didn't even win a game last year. It's kind of silly sometimes thinking about how these players these teams that they didn't even play. I mean, didn't even have that good of a season last year at all. And it's easy to talk about them because they went 0-16, and that's just crazy. It's a lot only what the Lions did it a few years ago. But now this year it's going to be interesting to see if our defense if we can do the same thing as last year, where you pick a defense based off who's playing the Browns. I mean, that's kind of what I did last year for sure. And we'll see. I know a lot of people who I was able to talk to and play against last year did the same thing. I mean, you go and mix and match. But if they get a guy like Baker Mayfield, he might be thrown right in there, and then we'll be thinking about, maybe we start Baker Mayfield. But then again, starting a quarterback wearing those colors, I just don't know about that. Wearing those Browns colors and starting a quarterback playing for the Browns would be a tough task. Tough task, I think, because it's just I don't know how that's gonna work, how it's gonna go over. Being a Brown supporter has got to be tough, isn't it? I mean, imagine like a lot of those guys who pick based off of their favorite teams and stuff. When you're doing fantasy, you should have a favorite team. You should have your team that you create to be your favorite team. It's all obviously all a hodgepodge of different players, and the way you can work your way through a draft, whether it's IDP or not, or 12 player. I mean, you got to look for value whenever you can. And then we talked about in the last show, we talked about how you can always find value, especially with these keeper leagues, and how you can wait till either the second or third round or find a guy who is the most valuable for you later in the rounds to keep. And that's what you got to do this year. You got to be able to find what you can find throughout the draft at each position. You draft. It's like the NFL draft. Do you draft based off of best available talent? Do you draft off of just need or whatever you need? I mean, obviously you want to fill out your roster. You want to have enough players, but the waiver wire is pretty deep. There's lots of players out there, especially if you're in a 10-man league. If you are drafting a bunch of, fill out your team and you draft a bunch of receivers or draft a bunch of running backs in your bench, you can mix and match. You could drop, makes it easier to drop players. That's actually always what it's been my toughest task. Is when I pick somebody up that I want, it's like, okay, now who do I have to get rid of? That's gonna be fun. I just don't know what's gonna happen. Yeah, fantasy drafts. We're a long way off, but there's always news coming out that's going to affect what's going to happen, and that's going to be, especially on Thursday, what's going to happen is to see what kind of defenses are going to improve, who's going to jump up in the defensive ranks. I mean, I know we had a lot of stuff happen over the offseason regarding the Rams and their defensive moves, getting Ndamukong Suh, getting Peters, and getting Keep to leave, and now they're kind of sitting there. As I'm looking at the draft rankings right now, they're sitting there at the third team behind Minnesota and Jacksonville. Actually, Jacksonville and Minnesota are pretty interchangeable to me at the top of that list regarding best defenses in the league. There's going to be some more teams probably. We're going to find out how good the Bears defense is, how good the Patriots defense is going to be this year. I mean, like I said, it's always going to be mixing and matching, and it's actually more picking the offense that they're playing against and seeing if they're turnover prone, because that's how you get points for a defense. Obviously, you can if they're turnover prone, you're going to get points off that. Obviously, I mean, if you keep them under 10 points, that's probably the best way to make points. But I mean, it's very hard to keep any NFL team, no matter how bad they are, under whatever is two scores, 7 or 10 points. So, I mean, that's how it's kind of incremented out, as if the whole points allowed thing when it comes to defensive teams. But no, I think it's going to be very much some impact rookie quarterbacks, like I'm saying. I think Sam Darnold might actually be an impact, especially if he drops to the Giants. If he drops to the Giants on Thursday, and Eli does not perform very well, he gets thrown in there. He can. What if he gets a good rapport with ODB? I mean, what if he's a guy you're going to be like, oh, I need a quarterback. I'm going to go pick up Sam Darnold off of waivers. I mean, he's going to be sitting right there, especially if he's on the Giants. I mean, his draft stock, or I wouldn't draft him anyways. I wouldn't say his draft stock in fantasy, but his viability maybe coming in halfway through the season. Or not even if Eli is not doing what Eli needs to do to stay on the field, then he could be a guy you could think about putting, just kind of sitting on your bench and just like waiting. All right, let's see what happens. Same thing with Baker. I mean, I wouldn't draft Baker either, but I mean, if he gets matched up against a good team, especially if he gets picked number 1 overall and is playing starting day 1 with Cleveland, you got to think about picking him up and maybe putting him on your bench, or just kind of thinking about if you have a guy with a bye week and you're like, okay, Cleveland, maybe they're going against another weak defense. I mean, because Cleveland's got some weapons on the outside. If you're Baker Mayfield and you get drafted by the Browns, you gotta be like, I mean, that's not bad. You got Jarvis Landry, you got Corey Coleman, you got Josh Gordon's back now. I mean, I'm probably forgetting somebody, but they have some weapons on the outside there, and they can be dangerous in the passing game. So, like I said, maybe we're going back to the whole thing about the defense. We're past the time where we can just, who are the Browns playing? All right, I'll pick that defense. I mean, that might not be the tactic anymore. You got to find another team that has an anemic offense, which we will. We'll find somebody. Especially if the Broncos don't draft a quarterback. That'd be the offense to pick right there. If Trevor Siemian is still the quarterback, of the Denver Broncos, then definitely think about doing that, because that offense was pretty dismal last year, and that's going to be another interesting thing. These teams, these offenses in general, are going to be shifted, and there's going to be more, just not just the quarterbacks. There are going to be some fantasy implications coming on Thursday as well when we get these crop of rookies in there, and some of these guys are going to be pretty deemed to start pretty quickly. Like if the Broncos get Saquon at 5. I don't know. That's the problem with this. It's just speculation. If you listen to the show I did yesterday on the college football show, I did a lot of draft talk as well. We don't know what's going to happen. There's so much mystery going on Thursday. We have just now hearing reports 5 days out, that the Browns are interested in Baker Mayfield. The Jets are going crazy. And like now the Jets are like, oh, crap. Maybe that's a team that you can play your defense against, because if they have Teddy Bridgewater as their quarterback, look out below. Rack up some points there with the interception machine right there. So especially in that weather, Teddy doesn't have that good of an arm, so the ball might blow over to a defensive line or to a defensive back, and it'll be up for an interception one of these games. Actually, I wouldn't be surprised if he throws a deep ball and the ball kind of just drifts over from the wind right into the arms of the defensive back. Interception, pick six, what have you. I mean, obviously that's how you score points for a defense too. That's kind of, pick sixes are pretty up to chance. Obviously, if you have a defense that is very athletic and they get a lot of interceptions, once in a while they're going to run one back. So you got to put that up to chance, whether you're going to draft a top defense or, I mean, if you miss out on Jacksonville and Minnesota, if you don't go for those guys early in the draft, because there's always going to be the first guy to pick a defense in the draft, and whether they do it in the 12th round or the 10th round or the 7th or the 14th round, it doesn't matter. There's always going to be a first guy to pick a defense, and they're probably going to get the top defense because they just want it. They're going to leave more value on the board and take a defense at whatever round 13, and so they could have Jacksonville or Minnesota, and then you could take somebody else or just wait and get more player value and get a defense as you mix and match. Because I don't know how many defenses I went through last season. I don't know how many. A lot. I mean, this segment has kind of turned into the whole defensive, like how do you pick a defense, how do you deal with the defense, or just kind of outlook for this season. That's what we're doing. Also, we're taking the draft and doing the NFL draft and outlooking the season and seeing which teams we're going to be able to exploit with mix and matching the defenses. So it's going to be interesting to see how it works out coming up on Thursday and which teams are going to be maybe a little more viable on the offensive side. I mean, on the defensive side, there's going to be a lot of teams that are probably going to improve. That one might be a little less being recognizable as fantasy is pretty much offensive. There's the defensive team, which we've been talking about, but it's pretty much offensive, and it's all week to week. So you kind of go off your matchups. Oh, okay, you're not going to play against the same team every week, obviously, when it comes to if you pick Deshaun Watson, but the Colts defense got really good. Well, he only plays the Colts twice. So you're not going to not pick Deshaun Watson because the Colts drafted a really good defensive back or something like that. I mean, they play him twice. So, I mean, maybe when it rolls down to that week, you can decide based off the projections, but I mean, you're not going to not draft Deshaun Watson just because the Colts picked one dude. So that's what I'm saying. The offensive guys the offensive draft picks are probably on Thursday. They're going to probably be a little bit more, have a little more impact when it comes to what kind of who you're going to draft, what you're going to draft, and then we're going to wait and see if we're going to find an Alvin Kamara, if we're going to find a Christian McCaffrey that was big impact players as rookies. So, I mean, I know we're going to have a couple quarterbacks, maybe Sam Darnold, maybe a Baker Mayfield. If they get some time on the field this season, they can be impact players in the fantasy game. Josh Rosen, his best bet, I don't think he's going to find the field this season, depending on where he goes. But, I mean, if Baker goes first, the Jets could pick Josh Rosen, and he could find himself on the field real fast at MetLife Stadium, depending on how Teddy Bridgewater and how they do at training camp. So there's always stuff to go, and there's a lot of speculation. And that's the end of this first segment. As we get to the second segment, we're going to be talking about some more ways to think about how you're going to draft a running back throughout this draft. We'll do that when we get back.
Are you looking for the very best NFL and college football podcast? Then check out the GSMC Football Podcast. Get the latest football news both on and off the field. From the NFL Draft to trades to the rumor mill to the NFL Combines. They got you covered. That's GSMCpodcast.com/football-podcast. Get updates on college rivalries, game day insights, and much, much more. It's football talk the way you want it. This show eats, sleeps, and breathes football. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
Welcome back to the GSMC Fantasy Football Podcast. All right, let's talk about some running backs. We got. I know last episode we did talk about some guys who are coming back off of injury, and running backs always injury prone. We have two big running backs coming off of injury in this season. Obviously, David Johnson, highly touted running back for the Cardinals, is going to be probably, he's still a first round pick. He'll still definitely sitting up there in the first round. Also, you got Dalvin Cook, the young kid who hasn't really proven himself too much, but he had a really nice nice run with the Vikings before he went down with that injury. Obviously had a nice college career at Florida State, Dalvin Cook. So you got to think about him if you are maybe looking for a little more value at the running back position down in the draft. For those who are in the PPR leagues, obviously we're going to think about guys like Christian McCaffrey, guys like Kamara, guys like Jerick McKinnon on the Niners now, who's going to be catching. They're all going to be catching a lot of balls out of the backfield, a lot of little pass plays in the flat. They're going to probably get some nice yardage. We're seeing now these days where these guys who are so fast they can outrun these linebackers, and they get good yardage of the catches. You got good. If you have, it's all a team game. Football is, you got to think about it. If you have guys who are going to catch the ball to the backfield like that, and they have good blocking receivers. I know for Kamara, Michael Thomas is a very good blocking receiver. That's why Kamara was probably so good last year, because Michael Thomas just pushed the corner down the field, and Kamara was able to run right behind him and was able to outrun any undercutting linebackers. So if you got good blocking receivers, you got a good speedy running back who's got and then obviously a quarterback with touch. You're looking at that. So it's all stuff to take into account come draft day, and come time when you are going to make a decision on who to start and who not to start against a certain team. So it's all about matchups, obviously, but it's also all about the players around them. So Alvin Kamara would not have been as good of a fantasy player as he was last year without Drew Brees, and probably without Michael Thomas. To be honest, I was thinking about that. It's a pretty good example of a receiver that will help out his running back when it comes to yards after the catch and getting him down the field, or not even after a catch, but even on a run play. Michael Thomas, a good blocking receiver. So they're all over the place. Like Pierre Garçon is a pretty good blocking receiver, even for a smaller guy. Out in San Francisco, Jerick McKinnon is going to be able to do that. Adam Thielen. There's people all over the place who are willing to throw their weight around and block out some DBs in order to get some running room for their running back. So you got to think about that as you are drafting come this fall. I know we're a long way off from draft day. That's why I kind of want to talk about the draft day that's closer, and that's the NFL draft, and how you're going to have some fantasy we're going to have some fantasy implications coming down the pike. Obviously, with the running backs, there are a lot of them in this segment. We are talking about running backs. If you were looking, I'm looking forward to seeing how these guys are going to come out. Obviously, this is Darius Geis and the Saquon Barkley. I'm really interested in seeing Saquon Barkley. I've never been the biggest Saquon Barkley guy. I've never been really super high on him. I know I've seen him on certain draft boards. I've seen him go early second round, late first round, and this guy hasn't had a snap yet in the NFL, and we're already putting him in some seriously valuable fantasy spots right now. So when it comes to drafts, these draft picks are not. And especially for a fantasy draft, the top 5 picks, I think the first 5 rounds are really the rounds, especially the ones. I mean, most leagues have a can't cut list, right? I mean, I don't know. Not all leagues have it, but most leagues have a can't cut list. And if you drop somebody within the first, I think it's either the first and second round, or first, second, and third round. Within the first 3 rounds, you can't cut them. They're going to be on your team the whole time. You can't cut them. So I mean, you're really not going to want to cut your first round pick anyway. So especially the first round, maybe 1 through 5, are pretty valuable guys that you're going to have the whole rest of the season, likely, barring any injuries. So, of course. The best ability is availability, and that goes for everything, especially fantasy. Can't play somebody if they're hurt, because that's 0 points right there. That's a big 0. That's going to basically deaden you or put you in a serious hole coming into your fantasy week. You don't want to start anybody who's hurt, obviously. It's interesting thinking about how some of these running backs are going to be coming into the league, and it really depends on which team they go on. Really depends. That's maybe. I'll probably be interested to talk about this show this time next week when we know where these running backs are going to be and how they fit into each team, and which one could be maybe a viable fantasy player come the season. These rookies, especially Sony Michel, is who I'm thinking about. Obviously, also Nick Chubb and Ronald Jones. Those aren't the biggest names. I already said the 2 biggest names just a second ago. But, I mean, Darius, guys, he's a great runner as well. So that's one of the big names I was talking about from LSU. And he's a guy who was underneath and probably knows all the tips and tricks that Leonard Fournette has and can get down the field, and is a guy who is going to break a lot of tackles in his career. And is probably going to get a lot of points after first contact, which is always nice if you are a fantasy owner. All right. More about the running backs. I mean, I just continue thinking, which team is more prone? That's why I'm thinking Saquon to the Browns, because the Browns, they probably should have picked Christian McCaffrey. I mean, they probably should have picked Broncos, not Browns. Broncos. Broncos had a later pick last year. I know they wouldn't have had a chance to get him. I just saw a weird article that was a redo of the draft last year, and it had Christian McCaffrey dropping all the way to 22, going to Detroit. I mean, to Denver, the Broncos. And I'm like, really? I mean, yeah, he would have fit in nicely. They need a running back, but they're going to be drafting 5th now, and they're probably going to be able to have Saquon Barkley drop to them, assuming that he doesn't go the pick before to the Broncos. Because, I mean, if anything, the Browns, they have 2 picks. They already got their quarterback with the first pick. Then you should trade that second pick and fleece somebody. If you're John Dorsey, stock up some picks. Get something. I mean, go back to 12. Get your guy back there. Get somebody else back there. I mean, I want to see Bradley Chubb either in Tampa, which I think would be a nice place for him fantasy-wise, especially having Jameis Winston to play off of, especially helping Jameis out of the backfield. Probably Jameis likes all those security blankets, so if you're a PPR person and Saquon goes to Tampa, wouldn't be a bad pick, because he's going to get a lot of catches out of that backfield. Dirk Cutter, that's kind of how the Dirk Cutter offense works anyways. A lot of movements out of the backfield, so he'll probably get a lot of touches too. But he's been a guy who I never been that enamored with. I mean, he's a great home run hitter, but he's just all flash, and he never really had carried a big load in college. So, I mean, you look at the stats; they put him up against Zeke Elliott and against Christian McCaffrey, and he was lacking significantly when it comes to games averaging over 4 or 3 yards a carry. Or under 3. I mean, games averaging under 3 yards a carry, and games carrying over 20 carries, doing over 20 carries. And I think Saquon had 4 or 5 games under 3 yards a carry. Christian McCaffrey had 0. He actually had 0 under 3 yards. He had 0 games under 3 yards a carry. He had 0 games under 4 yards a carry, to be honest. That's how good Christian McCaffrey was at Stanford. But then you have Zeke Elliott, same thing. He had one game, I think, one or two games, probably one, where he was under 3 yards a carry, and he had a bunch of games where he had over 20 carries. Same with McCaffrey. Saquon only had 1 game over 20 carries, I believe, or 2. Very small numbers. So if it translates to the NFL, if you're going to think about it, picking him, I don't know. I'd wait. Maybe wait for somebody to pick him early and waste the first round pick on him or early pick on him in the draft, and then watch them drop him halfway through the draft. Like if they pick him fourth with their fourth round, watch him last about a week or about 5 weeks or 6 weeks. I just want to see him, and obviously it depends which team he's going to go to, and we're going to have plenty of time to think about that, him getting through training camp, all the different hypey hubbub that's going to be going on between now and the draft. But that's all I got to talk about now is these rookies coming in. We know where these free agents went. I went and did a whole post free agent show, and we talked about where the implications of Allen Robertson and Allen Hurns, and what Sammy Watkins is going to do in Kansas City, which actually I think Sammy Watkins is going to be a nice little thing to use for Patrick Mahomes, because Patrick Mahomes has got an absolute cannon. And talk about a guy that maybe you want to think about drafting to be as kind of like your mix and match quarterback. If your other quarterback is not viable or is not playing, Patrick Mahomes would be a good guy. I'm going to have to do that next segment. It's like worst case scenarios, basically. Next segment, we're going to talk about worst case scenarios. If your quarterback gets hurt, the one you draft, or if you couldn't pick a top 10 quarterback, who would you pick, basically? And I think Patrick Mahomes is sitting right there at like 11. Matt Ryan, too. So that's going to be interesting. We'll talk about that in the next segment. Just kind of like came across, oh, yeah, that's what we should do. Yeah, but as far as running backs, as we're talking about in this segment, which is what we've been doing for a little bit here. Running backs, you got to decide what you're going to do early. Am I going to just go all in on them, or am I going to mix and match them? Because if you go all in on them, it's tough to cut one, especially when you're like, oh, I drafted him. Oh, I like him, though. I like him. You can't be fanboy about it. You can't be a fanboy. You got to think about it more analytically and more efficiently than that, because then by the time you make a decision, you've already lost 2 weeks in a row. That's how fantasy works. It's actually pretty fast-paced, because now with the scheduling in the NFL, we have Monday Night Football, the matchup's over, Monday, Tuesday's off, or Tuesday, Wednesday's off, and then boom, Thursday Night Football. You got to have your lineup set, done. Well, not set and done, but if you have somebody playing that day, you got to decide if you want to play him or not. You got to decide if you're going to put him in your lineup on that Thursday night for the Thursday night game. So it's going to be fun. I always thought it was fun because it was really fast paced, and I just I get to work. I get to tinker with my lineup for a whole week. I get 2 days, and then a couple more days after that for the Sunday games, because now these teams, they don't lock your lineups because the injury reports now are coming out later and they're more vague, and these teams that basically the injury reports are just for fantasy players. We don't care. We just want to know if they're going to play or not. I know obviously they're keeping it close to the vest because the other teams care too, but it's just interesting because I'm like, we just want to see if he's going to play so we can sit him or bench him. Is all I want to know. It's all I want to know. Especially with running backs, because I probably have a couple more of them that I drafted on the bench that can be used. All right. That'll wrap it up for this segment. Next segment, like I said, we're going to talk about worst case scenario. Where do you go if your quarterback gets hurt in the early season? What do you do, and how do you do it? We'll talk about that when we get back.
Check out the show that's built on the MMA, from the UFC to extreme cage fighting. They got the fights covered. Check out the GSMC MMA Podcast. Get the latest news on past or upcoming fights. Join us as we talk to and about some of the biggest names in the MMA, past, present, and future. When it's the fight game, there's just one show to check out. GSMCpodcast.com/MMA-podcast. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
Welcome back to the GSMC Fantasy Football Podcast. We talked about some rookies, some running backs, kind of a mixed bag here in the first half of the show. Now we're going to get into your worst nightmares. Your quarterback. Well, honestly, it's not the worst nightmare. But your quarterback, say you drafted a quarterback for the first 3 picks. You drafted Aaron Rodgers like I did last year. Gets hurt, breaks his collarbone, he's out. What do? You're in a 10-man league. Or even a 12-man league. Do you go to that number 13 quarterback? Do you hope nobody picked Jimmy Garoppolo and he's still out there? Do you make a trade? Do you work the waiver wire? What do you do? Well, I would look at the waiver wire, honestly. You gotta look at the waiver wire before you try and trade your soul away for a quarterback, because there's quarterbacks all over the place. I mean, even in a 10-man league, if you're thinking about the top 10 quarterbacks, there's going to be a Matt Ryan left. There's going to be even a Patrick Mahomes left. There's going to be a Marcus Mariota left. All those guys can put you points up. And especially, it's all mix and match. What you got to do is you get 2 guys, like I did what I did last year. And when Aaron Rodgers went down, I picked up I already had Ben Roethlisberger from the draft. I drafted him last. So hopefully you have a good quarterback. Maybe you picked last in the draft. I picked him like literally the last round, Ben Roethlisberger. And then I also had Matt Stafford. I picked up Matt Stafford when I saw him on the waiver wire. So I had both of them sitting there. So whoever had the easier matchup started. And both did fine. I mean, they're both good quarterbacks, and it's an 8-man league, so everybody else. One of the guys had Derek Carr. I mean, Derek Carr is a good quarterback, but we had. I mean, it was just interesting how we had 7. Let's say there's 7 more guys. So it's Brady, and Breeze, and Wentz, and Wilson. I mean, everybody mixed around. I mean, even Tyrod Taylor had a decent fantasy year last year. I mean, there's people all over the place. You always find something that's going to hold you over until your guy gets back on the field or back on your team. So, yeah, team. If we're gonna go for a chef, I mean, we're gonna go and cook up something crazy here. You got to make some team. You got to make his team as viable as possible when you're drafting, because a quarterback, I mean, isn't the biggest part. It's everything. It's all it's coming together when you're making this team up. So when you have a catastrophe in the kitchen, like I said, when you're being that was actually not a bad analogy. When you're making that chef analogy, when you have a catastrophe in the kitchen, you got to be able to have a replacement there. So when you have Sam Bradford or Sam Bradford, I don't know about Sam Bradford. Talk about no, that was the wrong thing. Matt Stafford. I always get those guys. Matt Stafford and then Ben Roethlisberger having a little bet going on back and forth of each other. Who's got the better matchup? Who has a higher projection? Projections are my nemesis. I have a love and hate relationship with projections, especially the live projections on Yahoo. If anybody out there use Yahoo for their fantasy needs and for their fantasy leagues, they know about the live projections on Yahoo and how they can be so volatile and it's up here. So they literally play to play. They will update these live projections and it'll go along with your score. Eventually it'll be the same as your score because it'll work its way out that way. I like looking at the big line and seeing, okay, how did my projections actually go up and down? Like, what the heck happened here? Who do they think was going to go off? I don't know what they make to make these projections, especially halfway through the game. It's interesting how they do something like that. All right. But yeah, worst case scenario. But another thing, running backs. Running backs are interesting too. There's lots. The only thing that maybe it would be the most devastating thing, honestly, because of the fact that it's called lack of depth. And that's probably tight end. Probably tight end. You can probably find somebody who's always a tight end who's going to pop like a Hunter Henry for the Chargers, or a Evan Ingram for the Giants, who's going to pop randomly. And then you have your stalwarts and Jason Witten, and even Antonio Gates was a guy on fantasy who would be able to get in the end zone. If you can score. The fact, is if you can score, that's really what matters. If you can get in the end zone for a tight end, if you're a weapon in the red zone, that's why you can get drafted, and that's why you're going to be a good fantasy player. you gotta be able to do that very well. Yeah, it's interesting talking about fantasy in April. I mean, I want more and more. I think about it, I was like, okay, what's the draft going to do? We talked about it in the first segment of this, what that first round of the draft is going to do. But I mean, there's so much speculation and so little time. I mean, I can give you so many tips and tricks regarding fantasy and stuff like that. But it's just going to be interesting seeing how it all works out in this as we go along today. Might have to get. I'm going to get my. I know I wanted to do the draft simulation today. I'm going to have to do that on Thursday as we get that figured out. I want to do the IEP draft simulator and get that figured out in order to let me do some individual defensive players in that draft simulator. But yeah, the show might only go. I mean, yeah, we'll see how long we go today. As there's only so much we can talk about regarding the fantasy implications of the draft. I mean, I can continue on with the fact that some teams are going to get more tough defensively. I can do only so much speculation when it comes to the draft on Thursday. When we get to Thursday, maybe we'll have a bigger picture of what's going on, and especially next Tuesday, I could definitely talk to Ignatium about what team improved themselves, what team is going to be a tough matchup regarding who's your quarterback, if you want to stay away. I mean, it's one thing I kept saying, like, it's not going to 2 games aren't going to keep you from drafting Aaron Rodgers if the Bears get all of a sudden draft a great defensive player. I mean, an offensive guy, like if your team gets Darius Geis, maybe you don't want to have him share carries with somebody else. I mean, I remember last year Joe Mixon got drafted by the Bengals, and he actually ended up being a very nice. I picked him over Jeremy Hill, who was not as old as I thought he was. My friends always made fun of me. Oh, I thought Jeremy Hill was like in his late 20s. No, he's like 23. I mean, he's like 26. 25. He's not very old. Hasn't been in the league that long, but they got Joe Mixon. The Bengals did, and they did in tandem, and Joe Mixon actually ended up having a better year fantasy-wise. So, yeah, it's just interesting thinking about it like that. But, yeah, no, we'll probably do some more draft simulators. I can do one. I mean, it doesn't take very long. If we want to do another one right now with these, to see if we can throw some of these rookies in here. Well, let me throw the rookies in there. I don't know. But no, yeah, I can just continue on just gabbing about the fact that our favorite players will be back on the stage coming up in this level on the fantasy game. I mean, I don't know how many people put on you can go on to the little fantasy. I mean, there's obviously daily fantasy and all that stuff like that, but when it comes to fantasy football, it's all about being able to find those mix and matchups, finding out who's the hot player on the field, getting a guy who's going to get in the end zone, like a running back. Like, that's what I think Darius Geis is going to be a very good fantasy player, because he's going to be a grinder down in the low parts of closer to the goal line. And I'm trying to say, I don't know why I'm saying low, but no, closer to the goal line, those parts of the field where you're going to be able to get those pay dirt points down there by getting in the end zone, those short yardage plays. Yeah. Interesting. Yeah. I don't know if I would feel like doing a mock draft. We did 2 of those. They're only so interesting. They just bring up, the only thing they do, it's good vehicle, does bring up some good decision-making stuff when it comes to picking up two different players, but whether they're going for a veteran or going for a rookie or a younger player or going for a guy who's more unproven than not, I think training camp's going to probably give us a little more of an idea of what's to come, and as well as the more information. I mean, the thing about fantasy is the more information you get, the better. So it only can help you more by getting the fantasy stuff going. All right. I mean, we're probably going to do... Yeah, I mean, there's so much stuff to talk about. Obviously, we have the draft coming up on Thursday. When it comes to fantasy, I mean, can only go over so much when it comes to these guys. I want to wait till the draft comes up, and then we're really going to go in depth on Thursday before the draft. And I'm going to get this simulator worked out so we can do a mock draft on air, and then go into the draft stuff coming up on after next Tuesday. Which team really became a big fantasy player, or which player got into a good team in order to be a good fantasy player? Which team were like Joe Mixon on the Bengals? I feel that would be a good fit for him, where he could be kind of that secondary back for Jeremy Hill and get those points and down lower to the goal line, which is what he did. Scored a lot of 2-yard, 3-yard touchdowns. So, whereas Jeremy, and also caught some. I mean, you think about Jeremy Hill is that he's injury prone. Guys are injury prone, and if you have a guy like Saquon Barkley go to a team where you have a running back that's more injury prone, I mean, I think if Saquon Barkley, exactly, he's a good example. If Saquon Barkley goes to the Browns, then they already have 2 running backs. They already have Duke Johnson and Carlos Hyde. Like, what's going to go on there? They're going to battle it out in training camp. So, yeah, it's kind of interesting how they're going to decide to do that. And then, obviously, we have our impact rookie quarterbacks who are going to either start right off the bat or probably going to come in during the half of the season, during the middle of the season, due to the fact that they're going to be backing up some quarterbacks that are not as good as them anymore, likely. An example was Sam Darnold and Eli Manning. So, I mean, it's just interesting to see how it's going to be going down on Thursday, as we'll go into that very in-depth on Thursday and Tuesday with the fact that there's some serious implications in the draft. And like guys like Christian Kirk and Calvin Ridley, if they're going to be on teams that maybe you like them or maybe you don't, but they're going to be on teams where they get a good quarterback. Say, what if the Patriots drafted Calvin Ridley? He's going to have Tom Brady thrown to him or something like that. So it's just an example. If the Niners get Christian Kirk, they're going to have a guy like Jimmy Garoppolo thrown to him. So, I think the Niners are going to get a tight end. I think the Patriots are going to get. Honestly, I think the Patriots are going to get a quarterback. So that's not going to really have much fantasy implications. But you can always tell when a team makes a pick and if it's going to have some sort of fantasy implications coming towards it. So it's going to be coming along with it. So it's going to be interesting seeing it. Obviously, we want to keep everybody healthy, make sure everybody gets through training camp appropriately and getting ready for the season, so we can pick them and root him along as we get him through. Oh, he's on my. I always love it because it's like, oh, why are you watching that guy? Oh, he's on my fantasy team. Oh, best thing ever. Gotta love fantasy, and gotta love the NFL and the fact that all these players are. I mean, the fact that you can have a point value system put onto these guys' performances is pretty cool, and being able to follow them along, it's like just makes you more interested in all the different games. I mean, if everybody has their favorite team, obviously, but with fantasy football, it makes everybody more interested and more into the game. And I could even connect this to the NFL draft. I mean, I talked a lot about the NFL draft and which players are going to go where, but it's also about fantasy implications. There's lots of different stuff going along, and there's lots of different money to be made, especially because you guys are all probably betting on each other or on yourselves to win these fantasy leagues or to not. Man, that's why there's all these different shows. That's why I'm here giving you advice, right? You want to be able to win and beat all your friends. I bet you it's more than bragging rights, isn't it? All right. I'm going to just cut this show kind of short today. We're going to go 3 segments today because there's not much to go over until we get to the draft. We're going to kind of figure all this kind of stuff out as we get to the draft. I know I went over a lot of stuff last week regarding players coming off injury, players who are going to be coming in to new teams, players that maybe you're looking for a bounce-back season because it had a down one last year. So I can continue. We're going to continue on Thursday with more stuff as the draft. That'll be the morning. I'll be doing the show the morning before the draft starts. So I'll be doing a lot more draft prep, a lot more stuff regarding the NFL draft coming up and what implications it will have on your fantasy teams and your fantasy drafts. I mean, there was a lot of guys. I mean, you had, like I said, Joe Mixon was one of them. Alvin Kamara was one of them. Christian McCaffrey was one of them. You have, we had obviously the year before that was even bigger with the introduction of Carson Wentz, and then obviously some who else went with Carson Wentz? Why am I drawing a blank here? Oh, Jared Goff. Duh. So Jared Goff and Carson Wentz. Obviously, Jared Goff had much better season this past season. Carson Wentz has always been very good ever since he put on that Eagles uniform. So he became a fantasy favorite immediately. And I mean, we'll have to figure that. I mean, some of these guys we don't even know. Some of these guys, like, we'll figure out. Oh, he got drafted. Okay. Maybe we'll have to pick him up in the middle of the round. So I'll probably be putting a tag on everybody as we get through, as I find out which teams they're going to be on this weekend. And we'll be like, okay, that's a guy you might want to draft. That's a guy you might want to pick up during the waiver wire. So we'll figure that out as we go along. All right. So we're actually, we got to pick up. Oh, I think I'm going to come up with it. I'm going to come up with the next segment. We're going to come up with another segment. I got 15 more minutes in me. We're going to come up with another segment. We're going to come back just after this.
Check out the show built around the women of MMA. From the UFC to the extreme cage fighting, we got the fights covered.
Listen.
It's the Golden State Media Concepts Women's MMA Podcast. The latest news of upcoming fights, discussions of previous matches. Join us as we talk to and about the biggest names in women's mixed martial arts, past, present, and future. When it's the women's fight game, you know where to listen to. The Golden State Media Concepts Women's MMA Podcast.
All right, welcome back. We're going to do one more segment here at the end of this Tuesday, or actually, it's still morning time. I'm recording here in the morning here at the GSMC Podcast Network. I like to do the mornings here. It's fancy stuff. We're still waiting. This is a big waiting game. It's all speculatory waiting game until the draft. So I can keep just gabbing about which player is going to go where, but we don't know. On Thursday, we'll know where, and I'll then be able to determine if they are going to be a guy you can draft or a guy you want to wait on and maybe see if he's going to be available and viable during the waiver wire or throughout the season. So, these guys, you never know when they're going to pop. Was Alvin? I don't know how many. I can go look up the stats. How many times where Alvin Kamara was? How many times Alvin Kamara was drafted? In there, whether he was drafted or not, or was picked up on waivers. He kind of was like a nobody, third round out of Tennessee. Who picked him in the draft? Really? Usually when we're picking rookies, we're picking guys who are in the first round, at least maybe second round, sometimes, depending on who they are. All right. You never really know about what's going to be going on in the NFL draft. We like to speculate. We like to speculate what's going to be going on in our own drafts. That's the thing. You can compare the fantasy draft to the NFL draft because of it's based off of all these different. There's lots of different variables. You got. Honestly, the NFL draft's 32 different GMs and teams and war rooms all deciding. There's scenarios go left and right and trades. There's the only thing you don't really. I don't know. There's some of you guys do trades. Text me, tweet me, let me know. You guys do trades during your guys' drafts? I don't know if you trade picks. That'd be interesting. Oh, I'll trade you my third round pick for next year's first round pick. So he gets I don't get a first round pick next year. I don't think it really works that way in fantasy. That would be really interesting. Unless you just did some weird hybrid, even a hybrid weird keeper league would be kind of would be interesting. I don't know how that would work. But I get him next year, so you can make the pick, but I get him next year. That'll be interesting. He'll be my third round pick for next year. I don't get it. It's kind of interesting how a trade would make that work. You can trade up. I don't know. You get too straight up a spot in the draft. It's a snake draft. It don't really work that way in the NFL where it's not a snake draft. Because that's why there's no trades in fantasy football, because it's a snake draft. Some guys. Do you guys? How many people? I need to probably do. I'm going to throw up a poll. How many people do snake drafts versus not draft versus regular, straight up? Just 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Just obviously abbreviated. No, so 5-team leagues around here. You can't even. I think 8's probably the smallest one. That's only one worthwhile of doing is 8. Sometimes even that gets a little too bulked up. There is watered down versions, 12 bands, but the more teams there are, the more difficult it is. But it's also more fun because the more variables, more crazy team owner managers who think that they know the next secret to fantasy football. But yeah, I digress on that whole thing. All right, I said I had 15 minutes in me, but I'm gonna save it all for Thursday. We got a lot planned for next week, and then all of our draft prep stuff. Because there are going to be some players who are going to have some fantasy implications. As we're going to wrap it up for this show on a Tuesday, we'll be back on Thursday for another episode of the GSMC. This is the Fantasy Football Podcast, of course. I do the College Football Podcast as well on Monday, Wednesdays, and Fridays for you guys if you want to talk about where I rant a lot more about the actual players in the draft versus the fantasy implications of them. Here we're talking strictly about fantasy football and the different fantasy implications of all these players in the NFL, and of course the ones that will be joining in the ranks of the NFL players on Thursday, Friday, and Saturday down in Dallas when the NFL draft will commence come Thursday. I can't not wait to see, because then we'll have more to talk about. Of course, we'll actually have a little bit more of a picture painted for us to see which player will be able to fit where. All right. So until then, everybody enjoy their week, and we'll see you on Thursday.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Fantasy Football Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network, from movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.